You have to choose God over everyone and everything, even father, mother, even son, daughter. Over the years, this gospel has been interpreted at times very literally. Maybe you've heard this story, but many years ago, a young Howard Hubbard, was sent by the bishop to go study to be a priest in the seminary in Rome. And he had to go there on a ship in 1960. While he was there, his father got sick and died. And when he got the call, he went to the rector and asked for permission to fly home to attend his dad's funeral in Troy. And he was told, if you go home, don't come back. It's a sign that you're not called to be a priest. You have to put God above your father's funeral. So you can only imagine how he felt walking out of that office. He called his mother on the old transatlantic cable line. You can imagine what a big deal phone calls were in those days. And she said, Howard, your father loved you, and he really believed that God was calling you. He would tell you to stay there. He would tell you to go ahead and become a priest, and don't come home. So he did. But over the years, he's talked about it quite a bit. And it's very obvious that for him, it's a big sorrow. A story like that and other stories like it might turn your stomach and make you feel, I don't know about this gospel. It just doesn't seem like something God would really ask of us. And maybe it makes you think of another story in the Bible. I know that when I read this, another one came up from the Old Testament, and I'm wondering if it's been on your mind at all too. And you might say, I don't have the whole Bible memorized, Father. What are you asking? But maybe there's a story, if you think about a story that you hear quite often, that kids, if you've ever been a catechist, you know the kids will ask you about this. So Abraham and Isaac went up on the mountain, and God wanted Abraham to kill Isaac to show how much he loved God? So whenever we hear stories like that, we know that God is up to something, because parents can't be asked to choose anything over their children. We're just not made that way, and God's the one who made us. So what is really the point of this gospel? I think we need to look at it in as real and truthful a way as possible. My friend Diane is the mother of 8 children, and she thinks about this gospel a lot because she's a very strong believer. And here's what she said. She said, I don't believe that God wants to be number one on a list. I believe God is saying, I want to be in the center of everything. It's a different image, isn't it? God is not asking to be put on a ranking. God wants to be in the center of every single thing that's in our life, no matter what it is. So God isn't saying, will you choose me over your marriage? God is saying, put me in the center of that marriage. God isn't saying, would you choose me over your family life? God wants to be in the center of your family. You don't sacrifice your future for God. God wants to be in the middle of your future. God wants to be what determines every part of it. And I think if we make God the center, then we are being faithful to this gospel, and we can't go wrong. I have another friend whose house I was in. I went to dinner at my friend's house, and she has a plaque on the wall that I've seen in other houses before, and maybe you've seen it. Here's what the plaque says. Christ is the head of this house, the unseen guest at every meal, the silent listener to every conversation. I had seen that in another house or two before in my life, but it's so striking. God is the head here. God is the unseen guest. God overhears everything. And I said to my friend, what a beautiful plaque to have in your house. She goes, beautiful? You don't know how miserable that thing makes me. She said, it catches my eye every time I'm gossiping. I'll be telling a real good story. Listen to what I heard today. This is unbelievable. And then it'll catch her eye. God is listening. In the middle of saying a snarky comment to her husband, she'll see that God is right there. After buying something frivolous online and realizing that I shouldn't have bought that, there's the plaque right there, right near the spot where she has her laptop out. And I guess I'm tempted to ask myself, what are the things in my life that work the same way, that remind me when I'm losing focus to put God back in the center? I have a friend in Florida who does it a different way. He adds a step to his online banking every month. Whenever he checks his online banking accounts and gets them all squared away, he has a little piece of paper there, and he just writes down all of the ways he spent that money for God or for good. So he'll say, all right, this much went to church, and this much went to that, the Special Olympics, and this much went to that nonprofit, and I spent this much money. And maybe he might even at this time say, and I got takeout a couple extra times than I really needed because I really wanted to support our restaurants. But he says that after he writes down those things, he says, would God approve of this? Is this the amount of the gifts God has given me that God wants me sharing? And he said, sometimes God is saying, that's great, look at what you did, this is beautiful. But there's other times that he will acknowledge, I can't pat myself on the back this month. I really wasn't doing it. I think when we have things like that to remind ourselves, the plaque that my friend has, the tradition that my other friend has when he's doing his online banking, I think that we give a chance to shift the way we see things. Because for a lot of us, we kind of, if we're honest with ourselves, want God to co-sign everything we do. We have the plan. Here's what I want to do. I want to have this profession, or I want to marry this person, or I want to live in this place. And then we say, God, can you co-sign this for me? Just sign right there. And that's not the same thing as putting God in the center and saying, God, design my life for me. Show me where you want me to be. Abraham Lincoln is famous for saying this. He was asked at one point during the Civil War, Mr. President, do you believe that God is on the side of the North for the Civil War? And he said, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My concern is to be on God's side. It's such a different sense, isn't it? I don't want God to co-sign my war. I don't want God to co-sign what I'm doing. I want God to show me what's right and then do it. Sometimes we can think that God is so on our side that it's impossible for God to not be rooting for whatever we do. And there's an author who says something that I think is a wonderful check for that. She said, you can safely assume that you're starting to cast God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do. All the people that I'm most annoyed with, God's with me. God can't stand those people. That's usually a sign that I'm starting to lose my footing with what God really wants. So, it's interesting. We have one of the greatest times of year this week. I've heard it's going to be raining a little bit, which we need, so we should be happy. But Independence Day is the height of summer. And the 4th of July is such a joyful time for all of us. And it recalls for me what was the order that was taught to us a couple generations ago about how we should order our lives. Do you remember this was even sometimes written on the walls of parish gymnasiums? It would say God, country, family. And that was the order of things. And it might be fair to say that sometimes we've lost that order. But I think my friend Diane is bringing up something even more important. God doesn't want to be ranked. God doesn't just want to be on a list that we can check off. God wants to be in the center of our lives, of our patriotism, of our family. So as we go forth into this new week, as we return to practicing our faith, if not every week, we'll see how many people we get next week and adjust our numbers, and maybe it'll be at least once a month, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. As we get back into that groove, what a good time for us to ask ourselves, where is God in the priority for me? Because God doesn't want to be ranked on a list. God wants to be in the center of everything.